FIATech members and FIATech friends. I'm so glad you could join us today. I'm Nicole Testa Boston, the Deputy Director at FIATech, and we have an exciting hour planned for you to discuss the path to perfect power. With that, I want to introduce Fran Raybuck, who most all of you know. He's the Director of Intelligent Infrastructure Laboratory at Bentley Systems. He is a member of FIATech and a champion of our Element 7 new materials, methods, products, and equipment area, and has been instrumental in putting together this six-pack series that we've presented this year, this being the fifth in the series. And with that, I want to turn it over to Fran, who will be introducing our speaker today.
Thank you, Nicole. Welcome, everybody. And this next presentation it may not be as far away in the future as we have had in other discussions, but I think it will have far-reaching effects into the future. Our speaker today, Kurt Yeager, I actually met at the Connectivity Week conference, speaking there, and Kurt was also speaking in several panels. Kurt is the co-author, along with Bob Galvin, the ex-CEO of Motorola, of the published book Perfect Power. And we'll have that link to that book on the webpage there, and I highly recommend it. It has a good sort of story about what Kurt's going to talk about today, and also mentions a lot of the companies that are involved here in the SmartGrid. Kurt is retired as President and Chief Executive Officer of the Electric Power Research Institute, or EPRI, in September of 2004. And since retiring from EPRI, Mr. Yeager is serving as Executive Director of the nonprofit Galvin Electricity Initiative, and that's focused on transforming the reliability and the value of U.S. electricity service. Mr. Yeager is a fellow of the American Society of Mechanical Engineers and has served on several National Academy of Engineering committees. He is now also serving as a convening lead author for the International Institute of Applied Systems Analysis for the Global Energy Assessment Report to the United Nations and the World Bank. Mr. Yeager has authored over 200 technical papers and publications on energy and environmental topics. With that, Kurt, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Well, thank you very much, and good morning, ladies and gentlemen. The path to perfect power was stimulated basically by the fact that our power system in the United States today and in much of the world is very imperfect. It has been largely frozen from having innovation for at least 40 years and has been living on almost a life support level of technical advancement. So it is well behind the times. And my stimulus today for you is to think outside the box. I'm going to bring up a number of things, some of which you may agree with, some you may question, which is fine, but think outside the box. The basic bottom line here is challenge the status quo. The status quo in electricity service at all levels is absolutely inconsistent with the needs of the 21st century. And when Bob Galvin and I launched this Galvin Electricity Initiative back in early 2005, one of the goals we set was that the only goal worth having is perfection. We may or may not achieve perfection, but if you don't set the goal of perfection, you certainly will never get there, and you will be left with a very mediocre system in a world in which we must compete with people who, frankly, are setting perfection as their goal. Moving to the next slide, the first slide, forward to fundamentals. It's important, and as was underscored in the recent election and by the new administration, electricity is far more than just energy. It is fundamentally the lifeblood of our economy and quality of life. When we talk about transforming electricity, we're not talking about just trying to achieve a sustainable energy future. It is fundamental to a sustainable economic and environmental future for our nation. Electricity also must be viewed as a consumer service-based enterprise. The system we have today basically dumps dumb energy at our doorsteps, and that's the job. That was created back in the early 20th century as a focus to electrify the country, and it was the right thing to do at the time. But we completed electrification 50 years ago, and yet we are still operating under basically the same infrastructure and the same rules. And we must make it much more consumer-focused, in which we optimize supply and demand to meet each consumer's needs most effectively. Technology is available to relieve these pressures. that are now limiting the system and can truly elevate electricity service value, and much of my discussion this morning will be around that. But real progress will require the transformation not just of the infrastructure, but of the business model, the regulated monopoly business model that now controls electricity service. Next slide. Driving the pressure to do this today is what's been termed a perfect storm of challenges. We're all recognizing the cost increases that have been achieved here and are facing in electricity, not just fuel prices, which tend to follow gasoline prices, but also capital costs have doubled in just the last several years. So building new capacity is a very expensive proposition, and one which is being resisted almost at all costs today. Demand growth. The demand for the quantity of electricity continues to grow marginally, but most importantly is power quality. The quality of the system today was designed to turn on lights and motors, but it was not designed to manage and run a digital economy. In fact, electricity, the great irony to me is that the electricity industry, which is the foundation of the digital transformation and the digital economy, is basically the last bastion of an analog, electromechanically controlled industry. So we are basically still running this system with controls that were originally designed back literally in the first quarter of the 20th century. Energy security, again, vulnerability and our dependence. If we are going to become independent in this country, energy independent, electricity will be the key. We are the richest country in the world, literally, in terms of energy resources. That we must depend on importing energy, particularly from people who wish us no good, is to me almost one of the great tyrannies of our day. And so electricity will allow us truly to become not only energy clean, but energy self-sufficient if we choose to do so. And finally, climate change. The demands of the climate and the need to control carbon emissions places, again, tremendous emphasis on the electricity system. Going to the next slide. The value lost to the U.S. economy today, these challenges, just a couple of them, is profound. The unreliability of the system today costs our economy about $150 billion a year. That means as a consumer, for every dollar you're spending for electricity in your electricity bill, you're spending about another dollar for the unnecessary added costs of goods and services that are added because of loss of productivity or because of all the backup systems that people have to put on in to keep their assembly lines and data centers on. That's a very high cost. Inefficiency, the waste of energy, just not in the production, but just in the end use and delivery, over $100 billion. And finally, the overall productivity penalty operating in a globally competitive economy where our power system, which used to be the model for the world, is now well down the list. We have one of the least reliable power systems in the developed world. Our average outage in this country as a household consumer would be about 4 hours a year. If you're in Japan, it's about 6 minutes, and if you're in Singapore, it's less than 1 minute. So those, the ability in Europe is in between, but well ahead of us. So the cost to correct that is about $25 billion a year. So it is a no-brainer, and the smart grid would pay for itself in less than 2 years. So what we call the smart grid. I have a little problem with the term smart grid, but we'll talk about that in a moment. But anyway, the transformation, the modernization of the power system would pay for itself almost immediately. Going to the next slide, how did we get here? Where are we in this? I'll call it the electricity sector life cycle. Like everything, industries, companies, individuals, we all have a life cycle. And as I say, the formation period, most of the technology we have today was created in that formation period. The rules that drive the system were designed in the 1930s as Public Utility Holding Company Act at the time, which was designed to recognize that large power production had to come from major plants and big transmission lines, and so we needed a few major monopolies, and the regulations were set up to protect the public from those monopolies. that has basically continued to today. We've gone over the last 30 years, however, as I say, we completed the electrification of the country by the late 1960s, and since that time we've been just kind of literally living on our past, if you will, eating our feedstock in this industry, and we now are at a point where the future is caught up. And we can either continue to have an electricity business, which is simply based on how much electricity can I sell. That's basically how utilities are regulated and incented today. It's based on how much electricity they sell, not on the reliability, quality, and efficiency of service. Or we can move to a quality-based power system. That is basically the transformation. If we don't make that transformation, we will not only see this sector continue to decline, but our country, in terms of global competitiveness and in providing a stable future for our children and grandchildren, will also decline dramatically. The next slide. The value of the 21st century transformation, well, most of this is probably fairly obvious now, but increasing the functionality and value of electricity, ultimately through consumer benefits that far outweigh the costs, would result in a system which is much more secure and functional. We'd fundamentally increase productivity and GDP growth rates in a global economy. We've substantially improved energy efficiency and electricity intensity. That means getting more bang for the buck, if you will, for each kilowatt hour of electricity. We accelerate the reduction in carbon emissions dramatically, not only by bringing in renewable energy, but also being able to use the power system we have today far more efficiency. Efficiency today is perhaps the greatest source of energy that we have if we apply it properly. And then reduced costs of infrastructure upgrades and expansion. Today, the system, because of its inefficiency, for example, transmission and distribution lines operate at about 1/3 of their capacity. With a smart grid transformation, putting in the digital control systems that will allow us to increase that capacity, at least double that capacity. So when someone says they've got to build a new transmission line, the first question I would ask is, how well are you using the ones you have? What have you done to maximize the carrying capacity of the systems you have? Next slide. Transforming the grid for the 21st century. Basically, the technologies here, and this is what I would call the sort of fleet of so-called smart technologies, but they start out, again, with digital electronic control, the ability to monitor and control the power system literally at the speed of light. I use the analogy today that today's power system is like a railroad that took 10 days to open or close a switch. And I think we would all conclude we wouldn't move many trains, and it would be a very inefficient system, a very dumb system. And that is exactly what we have. Because the electromechanical switches, we think operate very quickly. They do as we look at them, but they still, relative to the speed of light that the energy is flowing, have an equivalent of a 10-day delay, which means we really have no control over where electricity goes. If we have a little local outage before we can get it under control, it cascades over a whole region. So that is a fundamental. That's the first step, is electronically controlling the system. The technology to do that has existed literally for decades. Much of the same technology that has allowed us to transform telecommunications would allow us to transform electricity, and that was one of the reasons Bob Galvin, formerly of Motorola, was so interested in this area. Integrating electricity and communications, because the key here is not selling dumb energy, it's selling smart energy services that combine energy and communication so that the consumer and the supplier are in constant communications. And the key there is to transform the meter into a two-way consumer services gateway, the advanced metering infrastructure that you hear quite a bit about. Unfortunately, most of that advanced metering infrastructure is only smart as it looks back at the utility. In most cases, the regulators and the utilities are not sharing that intelligence with the consumer, or more importantly, with the consumer's devices and appliances. And so, frankly, the whole benefit of the smart grid, to a large extent, is lost, because much of the benefit must come from engaging the consumer, not as a prisoner, but as a partner, as a true customer, not a prisoner to the system. and the ability to incorporate renewable and distributed resources. Not to replace the bulk power grid, although that is possible, but from our perspective, the best use here is to complement the bulk power system to provide the initial power needed so that the lights and computers always stay under all conditions, but also as the system goes forward, we can sell, you as a consumer can sell power back to the grid. And you could also use power during those times of the day when power costs are very high. Cost of electricity varies by a factor of 5 to 10 over the course of the day. You don't know that if you're a retail consumer because you get a flat bill. So you have no incentive to adjust when and how you use electricity. But an intelligent grid that shares that intelligence with the consumer, and that's the first block of intelligence, is to provide dynamic pricing signals. Not that you have to look at a meter, but that all of your devices react to however you want them to react to that pricing signal, and that you can then, if you have distributed generation, rely on that generation when the prices of conventional power are very high. Finally, to reintroduce direct current into the system. It's interesting, we can literally reinvent Edison. Edison had all the right ideas. Unfortunately, he was about a century ahead of technology at the time. So alternating current was the right thing at the time, but like everything else in the system today, alternating current at all levels is largely a legacy that we are going to have to live with for a while. We won't change that overnight, but there is actually, if we could go to direct current, and in fact in your system today, there are direct current conversion points in the system, we'd have a far more efficient and reliable system at all levels with direct current. We can address that if there are questions later. Next slide. Innovation rarely comes from investment. It's interesting to note that in every industry that I've been familiar with, innovation does not this kind of transformative innovation does not come with inside the industry. It comes from outside the industry. It did not take, AT&T did not transform the telecommunications industry, even though they certainly could have had cell phone technology. Motorola was prepared to license it to them, and they rejected it because their idea of a mobile phone was basically putting a phone booth in the trunk of your car. There was no mobility there, so that's how Motorola really got started in the cell phone business. And similarly, IBM, because they were in the mainframe computer business, even though they had designed a laptop computer back in the 70s, said there's no market for this because they were in the mainframe business. It took an Apple computer to prove that there really was a market. So again, we have to bring in third parties. This is going to require this kind of conversion. While we want to partner with utilities in it, it is going to require the innovation of entrepreneurial third-party companies, whether it's IBM, Cisco, PowerPoint, all different companies of all different sizes have tremendous technological opportunities, and in fact creating the Electronet equivalent of the Internet will, I think, ultimately make the benefits of the Internet look almost like child's play by what will be created by this kind of a transformation. Moving on to the next slide, a smart grid here, the term of smart grid incorporates many activities, but the most important is the distribution system, and that's one of the things I want to emphasize here. The focus of the smart grid transformation, as it's called, must be at the distribution end if we're going to realize the benefits, at the interface with the consumer. Putting in new transmission lines or putting wind farms in the Dakotas is all well and good, but it is a trivial contribution. The real effort must be put at the local distribution systems, transforming the quality and reliability of service to those and incorporating distributed generation, which I think ultimately will pay a lot more benefits in terms of reducing carbon emissions as we go forward. But it is not a matter of eliminating any parts of the grid. It's a matter of transforming the grid as we have it into one that is operating with electronic and digital control and incorporating all of the opportunities for real-time, truly speed of light, real-time control throughout. The next slide. New technology opportunities abound in terms of end uses here. In homes, hyper-efficient technologies, all of which can be geared to operate automatically off of signals price signals and so forth from the grid, and that is where the third-party companies come in, being able to basically automate and mobilize all the devices in your home or business to take advantage of those price signals without in any way reducing the quality of service that you get. But at the end of the month, your electricity bill will go down dramatically, and the quality of service you get will have gone up dramatically. So that's basically the bottom line about what it is that we are needing to do in this country. But the focus must be at the distribution level. Unfortunately, and we'll talk about that in the second part of my talk, that is regulated at the state level. That is not a federally regulated system. And so when you hear the feds talk, they talk about transmission lines because FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, controls interstate commerce of electricity. They do not control intra-state commerce, and that is where all of the distribution systems are, and that is the root of the challenge that we face in creating a truly intelligent grid that will serve the interests of 21st century consumers. Next slide, key findings. We must convert and transition the electric utility industry to a demand-driven, dynamic price business, not one which is basically a regulated monopoly that simply has the incentive to dump as much dumb energy at your doorstep as possible. Utility economics are actually driving this transition because the ability to build the new capacity that's necessary is becoming so expensive that utilities and often more importantly the regulatory structure is going to have to look at this because new rate cases that literally we're going out with the rate cases. I'm going to double the price of electricity. I'm not going to give you any better service, and I'm not going to give you any control over your bill has proven to be dead on arrival and certainly to be a political third rail in a number of jurisdictions. So giving consumers more power over their destiny of energy and being able then to incent them to be more efficient is a key to holding the line on the price of electricity today. Noted there are many consumer convenient killer applications emerging and many new players, large and small, that are eager to enter if they can find a place in the system. But today, again, the regulated monopoly control of service, not of bulk power production, but also of service, needs to be changed so that service, taking that electricity and converting it into the services that you buy, can be provided by third-party collaborators who can work with utilities and consumers to bridge that gap. Commercial and residential markets are broadly becoming web-enabled and can be consumer-controlled. Basically, the same technology that you run a business or home security system on. That's basically the same kind of technology that you can make your home and business intelligent. Widespread real-time energy management will then significantly improve efficiency and reliability. Now, I'm going to pause here, but just say that unlocking these benefits, and that's how we'll talk in the second half of our discussion here, depends on smart technology, as we've talked about a bit, but even more importantly, smart policies and empowered consumers. So, ladies and gentlemen, you've been very kind to listen. Let me pause, and if there are any questions or issues that you'd like to put on the table before we proceed, please, I would be delighted.
Kurt, we do have a question. How soon do you think this transformation could come? I guess the question is twofold. How soon could it come, and how soon do you think it will come?
Yes, well, it could come right now. The transformation of the power system, and this was done, this analysis was done by the Electric Power Research Institute as an independent objective organization, could be done within 5 years, the total transformation, if we had the policies aligned to do it. I think it's likely to take closer to a decade, but certainly from the consumer end of things, if we can raise the consciousness of consumers and they recognize that the smart grid is not just about something that's going to benefit a utility, it's going to really benefit them, and there's a lot of questions out there about that today, then I think the political pressure to do this very quickly could be done. There is no technological limitation to it, and while the amount of money, we're talking $250 to $300 billion with a B, to do this transformation on a national basis, relatively speaking, to the benefit, as I say, that would pay for itself within less than 2 years. So I don't see that there should be any cost-benefit problem with this facing. This would be a much better use of much of our stimulus funding than I would argue it's being used today.
Thank you. I don't have any other questions. Fran, do you?
Yeah, Kurt, I have a question here. Current administration and others have put a big emphasis on creating alternate energy sources, and it seems like it may be the chicken before the egg here. You have to build a smart grid to really build a demand system that can feed back in and work with these alternate energy sources. So do you see these running in parallel, that we're developing these sources of energy and at the same time building a smart grid, or should the priority be put on building the smart grid?
Well, that's an excellent question, and thank you. Yes, well, the priority, the limiting factor in renewable, so-called clean renewable energy is the power grid. I just completed serving on National Research Council study on renewable energy, and in fact, we concluded that by and large, the so-called the clean energy portfolio standards that states and regions are establishing, frankly, aren't worth the paper they're written on. Getting more than single-digit, percentages, less than 10% of intermittent renewable energy is solar and wind power. The real issue, it's intermittent. That is, it's not steady like coal or nuclear. It comes and goes as the wind blows and as the sun shines. And in order to assure the reliability of the system today, you would have to build so much backup power that you would, to back up that intermittency, that you would really undermine both the economic and environmental advantages. With a smart grid, I can't totally eliminate that issue, but I can reduce it dramatically so that I can get much more renewable energy. So if we want 25 or 30% of our power coming from renewable energy sources, it must be built on the foundation of an intelligent electronic power system. Power system we have today is fundamentally incompatible with those goals.
Okay, and I have a question. In your book, Perfect Power, you mentioned a lot of different companies that have a piece of unique technology or contribution, I guess, to this microgrid concept. You have complications like communications and digital information and distribution and storage of energy, etc. Isn't the most complex part of this whole thing just the orchestration of all these players to get something built?
Well, I will give you my opinion on this based on my experience. What you want to do is open up the market for entrepreneurial competition. So that all of these companies who have interesting technologies and innovations can bring them forward into the market and let the consumer decide what the consumer really wants in terms of some of these service capabilities. These kinds of systems and the sources of them, I think we just have to open up the market. You can put certain quality requirements on them, of course, but if we're going to raise the reliability of the power system and meet the demands of a digital economy, we need to open it up to innovation, not to block the door to innovation.
Okay, great.
That's a major issue today, but of course that unless they want to become regulated monopolies themselves, which they do not, then they are literally excluded from market. So in the second half of my discussion here this morning, I'll get more into that detail.
Okay, let's do that. Let's move into the second half here.
All right, sir. Thank you.
I feel like it's a football game.
Constraints to transformation. Well, we've touched on it, but just to kind of summarize them here. First of all, we've had a lack of change leadership and consumer knowledge, and they kind of go together. Consumers, by and large, are pretty ignorant of what the current status of the power system is. They hear a lot of this smart grid talk, and they don't know what's in it for them, except maybe somebody charging them for a more expensive meter or something like that. So first of all, we have to get the facts out. We have to be able to demonstrate clearly to consumers, not just because Kurt Yeager or somebody else says it, but demonstrate the fact that these transformation is really a tremendous economic and environmental and quality of life benefit to them. So this change leadership, that's one of the reasons Bob Galvin and I started this initiative, was to begin to provide some of that change leadership. Not that we had all the answers, but that we wanted to open the door so that we could get as many smart people focused and engaged in this transformation effort as possible. Second, obsolete cost-benefit accounting rules. By and large, your electricity bill does not reflect the real benefits and costs of electricity. To say the marginal, and I'll be covering that again in a later slide in more detail, but just say that these accounting rules today largely lock us in to the past rather than enabling the future. We have dysfunctional building design and construction processes, and I hope there are people on the line here on the webinar from these areas, because I think again many of my experience with the building standards, again at the local level, are often even worse than the electricity standards in terms of being out of date and dysfunctional. They do not, again, encourage efficiency and true consumer value. They're basically based on least first cost, and that we pay a high price for that. We as consumers and owners pay a high price for that. Utility and regulatory resistance to change. Everybody resists transformative change. It's a way of life, so this is not necessarily an indictment, but it's a reality of life. Regulators like to be in control. They like to, in effect, be the consumer, so they continue to protect the consumer, even though give me the tools and I can protect myself much better. Don't control the utility based on how much electricity it sells and encourage you to sell more. Encourage him to be better in what the services he provides. And when you do that, then he will engage these third-party entrepreneurs and begin to bring them on board. Utilities can be incented to do that. It's not, again, a purely competitive market. It is a matter of being able to take the system that we have today and be able to use it in a much more effective manner. And then new entrant barriers, and say there are many discriminative rules and tariffs that literally block the IBMs and the Googles and the Ciscos and the smaller companies from truly playing an important role in this market. Demand response continues to be the utility demands, the consumer responds. We'd like to see demand response become the consumer demands, the utility response, as it is in any other business. This is the only business where effectively the consumer and the stockholder are held in opposition. Many utilities work with all of them, and most of the leading utilities in the country would agree with the arguments I'm making here, but they would say, Kurt, I agree with you in principle, but until you can change the rules so our stockholders don't pay all the bill for this change, we're going to have to be on the sideline. So there is no reason why the rules of regulation can't be changed so that utility stockholders are rewarded for the efficiency and reliability that their company provides, not just the amount of electricity they sell. It takes a little intelligence there to do that, but it certainly can be done. Moving on to the next slide, policy implications. Well, first of all, a truly smart grid is a transactive network. It seamlessly connects producers and consumers. Today, the meter as we know it is an iron curtain. We are trapped behind an iron curtain that holds us prisoners to this outmoded power system. We need a seamlessly connected, connection between supply and demand. So you have the ability and incentives to do more control of your supply and demand, and you are able to participate in this system as a true consumer, not as a prisoner. Price-responsive end-use devices that enable autonomous consumer control. That's the real key to empowerment. The technology is there, and that's where many of these third parties would begin to apply their capabilities, as we discuss in some depth in our book. A smart grid requires looking beyond the regulated monopoly business model. really removing the barriers to retail competition. And again, we're talking about retail service competition. This does not fundamentally reduce the amount of electricity or the bulk power system is the primary energy source. But as distributed power comes more into play, and you're able to put it into your homes and businesses, you should be able to do that and be able to make money on that, and that would save money for communities and for utilities if done properly. And the tool for this is what we call the intelligent microgrid. And the microgrid is designed to significantly, first and foremost, increase the consumer benefit, but also benefits producers as well. Going then to the next slide, what is a microgrid? Well, when we began the Galvin initiative and we sat down with a number of experts, power engineers and so forth, to say, okay, we really want to optimize the so-called smart or intelligent grid technologies, but we want to do it from a consumer focus. We want to make sure that the consumer, first and foremost, gets the maximum benefits. And so this means focusing basically on the system between the substation that is brings the bulk power, and then everything the distribution system and all of the controls, monitoring, and so forth that carry that power from that substation literally into the buildings and into the end uses in those buildings. And this picture gives you a little overview of what is involved in that. It is not tearing out lines and wires. It's putting in the digital systems and dynamic controls that are necessary to allow then distributed generation and storage to play a role. Plug-in hybrids, again, for a lot of talk about plug-in electric vehicles, those vehicles will only be a net benefit if they can also provide power to the grid. And they will also require a smart grid to do that. Otherwise, again, you're going to simply be stuck with a car that may be more fuel efficient, but your ability to really minimize the cost of energy and to be able to literally sell power back to the grid from that vehicle when you're sitting at your office or whatever is not going to be available until we create this intelligent system. That's the sort of the overview of the microgrid then is the basic architecture. It's not the end, it's the means to the end to bring the smart technology into focus and to demonstrate and create the benefits for consumers to maximize that, because until we've created a truly democratic power system here, we are not going to have something which is going to truly benefit consumers, and the cost of creating the smart grid will be very hard to justify because consumers will not see the economic benefits coming to them. What are some of the key characteristics of these intelligent microgrids? Well, first and foremost, they're self-healing. If there is any kind of a power issue, either inside or outside that microgrid that would affect service, it immediately detects it and allows the system to isolate itself and to use its internal power to keep the lights on and the computers running at all times. It empowers and incorporates the consumer and gives the consumer then truly control over his or her energy destiny in the home, and does so in a very consumer-friendly way. As I say, it's all automatic. It does not require any hand-holding from the consumer. It meets the power needs of 21st century consumers, the power quality consistent with a truly digital economy. It is tolerant of attack, both the physical as well as cyber attack. Here we can basically make sure that the system is not vulnerable to either, and accommodates a wide variety of supply and demand. In other words, we can bring in the combined heat and power, efficiency as a resource. We can bring in distributed generation, rooftop solar, wind power in some locations. All of that can be incorporated into the microgrid, which can be as small as an individual building or as large as a whole community. The benefits then, the next slide kind of puts this in dollars. These are the categories here of the benefits and only a couple of these are actually reflected. That's why I say if you just look at your electricity bill, it's going to be very difficult to justify a so-called smart grid transformation, and there are certainly some of the I would call it the protectors of the past who are counting on that. So it's important we challenge their economics. Right now, the big categories here, electricity consumption savings. You would save, let's say your average electricity bill is $1,000 a year. You'd save at least $100 off the top of that, plus another $75 to $100 in terms of time of use saving and shifting peak demand. So that's pretty close to a 20% reduction in your electricity bill, which is certainly nothing to sneeze at, but that's just the tip of the iceberg. Improved reliability will save in terms of cost. None of this is showing. These that are going on now are not part of your electricity bill, but they are very much a part of the electricity cost and the opportunity to both reduce those costs and create new productivity capabilities. Improving the reliability, getting rid of this 4 hours of outage a year that we have on average and getting it down to something that is competitive at a global level. $500 a year savings there in terms of cost of goods and services and improved competition. Avoided capacity costs, the ability to eliminate the utility having to build a new gas turbine generator for peak power or to build something else. We can use negawatts with an N rather than megawatts with an M for power here. And then job creation and increased income, the ability to really create new green business centers and in the country, and that's many communities. We're working with many communities in the country. I'll talk about that in a moment. And that's basically what they're doing. They're willing to go out and raise a bond issue because they're losing jobs today and companies because one of the major arguments is that the power supply system does not provide the reliability that they need, and it's cheaper for them to go somewhere else, literally somewhere else in the world, where that capability is at a higher level. So you sum that up, that's $1,000 plus a year for each resident on average in the country. So we're talking real dollars here, and the longer term potential is almost priceless in terms of the ability then for households to become electricity suppliers if they choose to, and to take part, if we have a carbon standard, to take part in emissions reductions for carbon. Our landmark demonstration site for this is the next slide, the Illinois Institute of Technology campus in Chicago. About 12 megawatt system there, and working in conjunction with the university and with Commonwealth Edison, the local utility, who was able to avoid having to build a new substation that they otherwise would have had to build. We are transforming that campus into what we call a perfect power architecture microgrid, incorporating distributed generation and producing absolutely flawless service to every dimension of that campus. And the university went ahead and did this, made the decision to do this on its own because the benefit ratio, cost to cost ratio, was more than 3 to 1. For every dollar they spent, they would get more than $3 back immediately with almost unlimited upside. They could sell power into the local power grid on day-ahead market, so they could sell excess power and make money on that. They eliminated outages that cost them between $500,000 and $1 million a year in terms of outage costs. They were able to create new research capabilities. And then after the commitment was made, DOE last year came in with a $7 million grant to accelerate this because they saw this as a model for how to transform power grids around the country. Now, the thing about campuses and also military bases, which are both areas where these microgrids are being applied primarily, is because they own their infrastructure. It's not owned by the utility, so they are not accountable to the utility to upgrade that. In communities, by and large, unless they have a municipal utility, all the electricity infrastructure is owned by the utility, and the community has no control over improving that infrastructure. So that is an issue, and that's one of the big policy issues that we are addressing, and I'll talk about in my closing remarks in a moment. Moving then from Illinois to New Mexico. New Mexico is a real leader in this country in what they call the smart green grid transformation, building out microgrids in all of their communities. And they have a program now which involves both federal, which will involve, I'm sure, federal funding and the stimulus funding, as well as Japanese funding, for at least 5 or 6 communities within New Mexico being transformed into these Perfect Power Microgrids. And we're pleased to be partnering with the state of New Mexico. And, of course, the governor there, which is leading this charge, is the former Secretary of Energy, Richardson, who, of course, termed our power system when he left his office as Secretary of Energy as a third world electricity system. And it may not be quite that bad, but he's certainly closer to the truth than we should allow, for sure. So it's very good. Here is a state that's doing it on a statewide basis, and this is the important part of the federal stimulus funding. There's this $4+ billion that's put up there for smart grid stimulus funding. But unfortunately, the bulk of it is probably only going to be spent on what I call quick and dirty shovel-ready projects with utilities to buy them a few meters or a few relays, not really to create a consumer-focused smart grid. So that's why a few of these major demonstrations that we work with DOE to incorporate into this program, even though I think the funding is inversely proportional, the bulk of it should be in those, but at least there is about $800 million that will be invested by the federal government in matching funds from the private sector into these regional smart grid projects, microgrid projects that will demonstrate the totally comprehensive smart grid transformation. Next, little lighter side here, we have been, one of our communications, and you may have seen this in the Wall Street Journal and elsewhere, is a series of ads from SAT-Socket. Basically, one of the lines we had, you'd be sad too if you had to power digital aid businesses on 1950s technology, and we're being kind of optimistic with 1950s technology. Most of it is more like 1930s technology, but at any rate, the SAT-Socket ad campaign, I think, has drawn a lot of attention, and hopefully our book and our website will give a good deal more. So in closing here, the goal here, as Bob Galvin said, and coming back to the Perfect Power System, is one that will ensure absolute and universal availability of energy in the quantity and quality necessary to meet every consumer's needs. It's a system that never fails. Doesn't mean everybody gets 9 nines. If you just you can buy whatever level of quality you want, but whatever you buy, you will always get. It will never fail to be there, and that's the key and why the microgrid is so important. That will demonstrate that that's not just a high-minded vision. That is the reality of technology today. And that leads us finally then to a new electricity constitution that we have literally passed with communities in the greater Chicago area, the city governments there, and the principles, and we are applying this on a national basis. And I've touched on most of this, but I'll just summarize it. First and foremost, provide all consumers with dynamic electricity rates and incentives. Again, all done incentives, and it's all done automatically by your devices, but you can take full advantage of this 5 to 10 fold variation in electricity prices over the course of the day. Establish competitive retail electricity service markets for all consumers. Allow these entrepreneurial third parties to come into the market and to bring you their entrepreneurial capabilities to transform the reliability and quality of bulk electricity. So basically, they would take from that substation I mentioned, in the microgrid, and they would incorporate their technologies best advantage between that substation and the final end use, your business or home. Require fundamentally higher distribution service reliability for all consumers. Today, the distribution reliability standards aren't worth the paper they're written on. Outages of less than 3 minutes aren't even counted. 3 minutes is an eternity in a digital world. We need standards which hold the system accountable to fractions of a second outages. And certainly the technology to enable that is there. But until we do, there will be little incentive to go to a truly smart grid. Provide all consumers with open access to their electricity service metrics. Most people today have no idea how different neighborhoods get very different power service. If you're in the downtown loop in Chicago, because the power went out in the loop several years ago and there was a lot of political pressure, the power service there is extraordinarily good. You go out into the surrounding neighborhoods and it isn't very good. So again, the bark that's listened to. So we've got to get people to know what their system is really doing to them and what it's costing them, and so that they can apply political pressure, because ultimately it's going to be the voting public that's going to make this change possible. And then finally, eliminate utility monopoly restrictions on community microgrids and distributed generation. Today, by and large, those monopoly restrictions basically close the door to much of what we're talking about here. Again, unless the community owns its infrastructure, that's why we're changing the rules in a number of states, or working towards that end, through legislation. It will take legislation. I don't think you're going to change the regulator's mind, per se. It's going to take the legislation from the communities and from their citizens to change the rules to make this possible. I wish it was done at the national level. We made quite a case to the new administration about that, but states' rights is a sort of a holy grail, and I'm all for states' rights, but when states' rights get in the way of the national good, it's time for the federal government to step in. That's what President Eisenhower did back in the 1950s, and that's why we have an interstate highway system. He said, we need an interstate highway system in this country. I want the states to build it, but you're going to have to build it to certain standards, and you won't get any federal money if you don't. And if you, in fact, we'll take money away from you if you don't do it right. So that was an offer that couldn't be refused. And basically that's what we need today in electricity. That is at least as important as the interstate highway system. And we need the same thing for the federal government to step in and say, this is how it's going to be done. And if you want any money to help get this started, this is what it's going to take. And finally, then, in closing, thank you very much for your very kind attention. And I hope that you will be encouraged to perhaps get our book, Perfect Power, and to read it. And I would welcome your critical comments, suggestions, both now and after you read that book. Because, again, my bottom line is to encourage you to think outside the box, to challenge the conventional wisdom, not to accept necessarily everything I've said, and I'm sure you won't as absolutely correct. I think it is, but the point is that you think about it and you create your own solution using the best technology and the best rules that you feel you can create. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kurt. Nicole, do you have any questions there?
I do. I have a couple. If every household and business is generating its own power, how would we pay, or how would the grid and grid maintenance be paid?
Thank you. The grid maintenance would basically pay, because you would still, for any time in the foreseeable future, and I say that basically over the course of this century, the bulk power system that you have today